Hello YouTube, Sidekick here with a Microsoft Flight Simulator video. And today we're taking a quick look at one of the aircraft that arrived in System Update 7, and that is the Pilatus PC-6 Porter. Not the most lovely aircraft in the world, but really a very interesting aircraft for Flight Simulator 2020. And I'm interested in flying it, so we're just going to take it out for a quick test flight today. We are here at the Victoria International Airport in beautiful British Columbia, and we have now jumped inside the cockpit. One thing to note with the cockpit is that there are two different cockpits available. One, the passenger version has the Garmin glass cockpit. The cargo version, only has the steam gauges, and that's the one we're going to fly today. Now, you'll have to excuse me. I am going to use the checklist because I'm still learning it, and as you can see, there are a number of steps to get to the point where you can get the engine started. First one of which is to remember which of these settings for the parking brake is on. And now I have messed it up. Is that it? No, I think I have it. No. Let's pull it out. Yes, I think out is on for the parking brake. That's my story and I'm sticking to it. Okay, parking brake is set. Power level is to idle. Let's move that. Idle control lever to cut off. Outside air temperature, I think we're going to assume that we're more than 10 degrees. So, well, let's take a look. The starter switch is here. It's off. Ignition switch is on. It should be off. Generator. Haha. Do I remember which one of these is the generator? I do not. It's one of these that's covered by that little flap, I think. Well, let's see if the system can help us out. Okay.
Generator.
That's
off.
the generator switch. Aux fuel pump is off. Lights, let's not get too worked up about lights. They're all down here on this side. I think I'm happy with our lighting config right now anyways. Okay, annunciations, or landing lights, radios. I think I'm going to leave them on, actually. Annunciations. What's all that about? Oh, okay.
Annunciations.
Those are the annunciations. I assume you just push them. Yes, you do. Okay, our annunciations have been checked. Battery master switch. Which one is that?
Battery master switch. On and checked.
Okay, that's that one. Okay, so that's the battery and the other one's the generator. Good. We're on. Fuel valve. And which one of these is open? Haha.
Fuel valve. Open.
Okay. That's how that works. Engine instruments. Yes, we have engine instruments. Oil temperature above 40 degrees. That's over here. Yes, it's above, or above minus 40. Yes, it's above minus 40. It's summer in Victoria. All right, let's start the engine. Make sure we scroll back to the top of the checklist. Done that a few times.
Fuel shut-off valve.
Open.
Open.
Okay, thought it was open the last time, but it changed it this time. All right, go with that. Aux fuel pump. I know that one. Can turn that one on. Propeller area clear. Turn on the ignition. Turn on the starter, turn on the ignition, and the propeller begins to turn. So we're going to be wanting our oil pressure to be coming up, which it is. We are going to want rotations at about 12%, which they are, so we can put throttle cutoff to low idle. We're watching the ITT and it's coming up. We're waiting till we're up past 46%, which we are. And then we can turn the starter switch off. Oil pressure is green. And the ITT is stabilized below 660. And we are done. All right. Now let's get pushed back here. Got it tuned to the right frequency. All right, let's do pushback. Oh, got to turn the brake off first. Now we're pushing back. Steer to the right, but don't seem to be having a whole lot of an effect anyway. So let's push back a ways here. I'm sure we can turn around if given enough room. There, reset my view a little so I can see out the window. That looks pretty good. A little bit farther back here. Okay, I got aircraft over there, so I think we'll turn to the left. And we'll get ourselves stopped here. And oops, we got to put the brakes on again. Now, one little switchology thing that I figured out is that I can bind the propeller reverse toggle to a button, which I have just pressed. And I find taxiing, I actually want the propeller in feather mode. When I pull it all the way back in feather mode, it actually gives me enough forward that I can actually taxi without the brakes on. But it's actually the easiest way to come to a stop, because when you're not in feather mode, there's always enough force pushing you forward that you won't roll to a stop. You have to use the brakes. So I prefer to do this. So I'm in feather mode right now, or reverse mode. And as I said, when I pull all the way back and engage, I get moving, and if I just crack it off a little bit, it goes into feather mode and slows down. And I prefer to taxi that way, but of course you can try it yourself and see what you think. This is partly because I'm just a little bit tentative right now. I'm still just learning the ground handling of this aircraft, and it is a tail dragger, so it has its idiosyncrasies. One of which that it has an absolutely massive amount of torque from that Pratt & Whitney Canada PT-6 engine stuck way out in front of us up there. But here we're not doing too badly. Moving our way out to the runway. Let's get up to the hold short line here and see if we're ready in all respects to go. And actually, I think there's one thing that I want to check. Yeah, I want to redo my flight rudder pedals because of that torque. When you're taking off in the Pilatus, you really want all of the rudder authority you can get. Now, I have in the past had my rudder pedals set up to be a little bit less sensitive. I find that they're more sensitive than I need for most of the aircraft that I fly, but not the Pilatus. So I'm just going to take a minute here and readjust the sensitivity settings for my rudder pedals. You guys can all watch me do that, and then we'll be ready to go here in a sec. Okay, I think that'll be a little bit better. Let's taxi out and get this party started. So as I said, there's enough power even in feather mode there for taxiing at a rate that I'm comfortable with. You can give it a little bit of gas if you want to as well, if you want to speed it up. You do have to remember to take it out of reverse or feather mode before you go to try and take off. That wouldn't work too well. Now, I have not been successful at finding a button to bind to the actual thrust reverse as well, because you can actually apply reverse thrust on landing, and I haven't been able to do it with a button. You can do it with a mouse click, but it's a little bit inconvenient given all the other things that are usually going on at the same time. So when I land this time, I'll be able to feather the prop, but I'm not going to put it into reverse. If anybody's figured out what button press does that, I would really be interested in knowing. Okay, we're lined up, so now we got the propeller back to forward, put it into full RPM, give ourselves a notch of flap, and with the brakes on, let's add power because it is a turbo. We want to let it warm up a little before we let the brakes off. Takes a little while for the thrust to catch up with the throttle with the turboprop. And like I said, it's a little bit of a ride with the rudders. There is an awful lot of torque and a significant P factor way out there in front of us. But we're up, and we've got flaps up. So the Pilatus is really a bit of a beast with that PT-6 out there in front of a fairly light airframe. It's really meant to carry a lot of payload, and it's meant to get you in and out of some fairly tight places, which one of the effects of that, of course, is that it does really climb. So we're holding it around to 80 knots here, and we're probably going to get about 2,000 feet per minute climb out of it, which is a pretty substantial amount of climb for an aircraft that only cruises at 120 knots. So we're just going to climb out here out of Victoria. We're going to make our way north along the coast to Nanaimo, which is kind of the second city on Vancouver Island, if you don't know the area. And we're just going to pull the power back a little to get us out of the red zone there. And we'll also pull the props back here soon to a more economical setting. One thing again, because it's a turboprop, the throttles do tend to lag, or the engine tends to lag the throttle just a little, so it takes a little bit of getting used to exactly what settings you want to get where you want to go. Alright, well, we're crossing through 2,000 feet, so I think we can start leveling off, pull the power back a little bit, get a look at that late afternoon sunshine here in Vancouver Island. So, the Pilatus PC-6 Turbo Porter. What more is there to say about it? It's been around since the late 1950s, 1959. About 600 of them have been made. It was designed, as you can tell, to be a short takeoff and landing aircraft. The Pilatus says that it can get into and out of spaces that are only normally accessible by rotorcraft, which is a pretty impressive claim, and one that I hope that I'll get a chance to check out in Microsoft Flight Simulator. I'm going to need to practice with it a little bit more before I start looking for really, really short strips, though, I think. It's powered by a Pratt & Whitney Canada PT-6A turboprop with about 500 shaft horsepower, which is a substantial increase over the original piston engine, which developed about half that. As you can see, it's ample power for getting off the ground quickly and for climbing out. Now, we're flying very light, no cargo, and only half a load of fuel, so it will be interesting also to test the aircraft when we load it right up and give it a full load of fuel and see what it's like getting off the ground then. But it's pretty sprightly, lightly loaded as it is today. So about 600 PC-6s, both the turbo and the original piston version, have been sold. I think about 500 of those have been the turbo version. As I said, the newer versions are available with a Garmin glass cockpit, and in Microsoft Flight Simulator, that is what you will find when you fly the passenger version. We are, of course, flying the cargo version, and as you can see, it still has the steam gauges, although it does have the Garmin 430 GPS unit to allow us to do some GPS navigation. So we're now continuing north out of Victoria. We're coming up to an area known as the San Sum Narrows, beyond which is the Stewart Channel, which will lead us eventually up to the city of Nanaimo. So, what more do we want to say about the Microsoft Flight Simulator, or rather, the Asobo implementation of the Turbo Porter? There is a payware version by Milviz, which I have not flown, but I have seen a lot of very complimentary videos about, so you should bear that in mind. So what is there to say about this version? Well, there are no very significant rough edges, that's for sure. The detailing is very nice in both cockpits. There's not a whole lot of wear. Particularly you might think in a cargo aircraft, you might want to see a little bit more wear and tear, but that's not really a big deal. As you can see, there's a lot of detail right from the bolts and the rivets. The external detail and textures are also done very competently. I don't think they're spectacular, but they're certainly very nice. The aircraft flies well, and it does take a little bit of work to trim it out properly, but once it's trimmed, it doesn't require a lot of hands-on stick to fly it where you want it to go. I haven't used the autopilot in this video at all, and I haven't used the autopilot in the steam gauge version, and I don't find it difficult to fly. It's not uncomfortable to fly with the turboprop engine there at set at cruise. It's not overly loud, and it does get you where you want to go at a decent rate of knots. I mean, about the same as any of the other small single-engine aircraft. The class of the Cub and the 172. It's going to get you there at 120 knots, which isn't bad. I think it's a really interesting aircraft to fly. It's not hard to fly. I think the challenge is going to be trying to learn how to master it, to get it in and out of really tight spots. And I think that's going to be an interesting challenge, and one that Microsoft Flight Simulator is going to provide by having provided the aircraft. So I'm looking forward to that. One thing I will say about the cockpit is that it is a fantastic cockpit in which to fly virtual reality. With the big windows on the side that allow you to look down at the ground, it just gives you a very immersive presence in the air in VR, kind of the same as the Cub does. And I made a video about that just a little while ago. So I think it's going to be a really fun aircraft to fly in VR. I think the stall approaches and takeoffs are going to be particularly interesting in VR as well. So I think it's going to be an aircraft that I spend a fair bit of time in Microsoft Flight Simulator. In terms of the fidelity of the flight model, it's a good Microsoft Flight Simulator aircraft, by which I mean that all of the macro effects that you would expect of the aircraft type are there. The turboprop engine responds the way that you would expect it to. You definitely see the effect of torque and P factor. You definitely see the effect of the big flaps when you're coming into land and when you're taking off. And so it behaves the way you would expect an aircraft like this to behave. That being said, it's also typical of Microsoft Flight Simulator aircraft in that it doesn't really have a lot of idiosyncrasies, which on the one hand is a good thing, but on the other hand, in a simulation like DCS, which has a lot more physics going on in the background, an aircraft like the A4 exhibits some really interesting tendencies in various parts of the flight envelope, because that's modeled in a very detailed way. And it's not so much in Microsoft Flight Simulator. It's not that aircraft, that the flight models are poor, although some of them I could point to, like the A4 in Microsoft Flight Simulator, are awful. The good flight models are good, but they don't. They just lack a little bit of the depth that you get, I think, in DCS. And if that's your thing, then you are going to find that Microsoft Flight Simulator it's a product that is designed more for an audience that's less concerned about using it as a study simulation of the detailed performance of various aircraft. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, but it is a thing. So I enjoy flying the Turbo Porter. I think I like the Steam gauge version better than the Garmin one. For this kind of aircraft, it feels more at home with kind of the very basic instrument set, but that's just my preference, I think. I think that, as I said, it's an easy aircraft to fly. I suspect it's going to take a little bit of practice to get good at flying it well, though. To really get the most out of its particular design, the very short takeoff and landing capabilities that it has, it is going to require a bit of practice, and that's one of the things that I'm looking forward to, is working up to the challenge of getting into really small and unprepared spaces, which is, let's face it, that's what the Porter does for a living, flying from hard surface runway to hard surface runway. Really not how the PC-6 usually makes its living. So we're getting ready to turn in on a long final here for Nanaimo. It's been a very pleasant flight up the coast of Vancouver Island. Starting to pull back on the power so that we can get the speed down. Now, what I have found, absent any manual of how to fly the aircraft, I like to try and get the speed down to around the top of the white zone, which I assume is the flap zone. The flaps are big, huge barn door flaps, and I find that when I deploy them, that pretty much takes my speed down to close to what I want it to be for final. without really having to do anything else. And actually, in actual fact, I probably have to add a little bit of power when I drop the flaps. So you don't really need to be going a whole lot slower than 100 when you deploy the flaps. And then after that, I work my speed down to around 65. There you get the first level of flaps. They definitely let you know they're there. And as you can see, the speed immediately starts to decrease. And we start to drop. So we got to add some power and pitch up a little bit, pull the speed back a little bit more. Get the second notch of flaps in here in a sec. And we're a little bit high, so I'm just letting it come down. But like I said, on landing, you are going to want to realize that it is possible to get behind the power curve of that turboprop out there in front. So you do need to be jockeying the power just a little. And you kind of need to leave a little bit of time. So you need to, at least for me, I need to adjust the power, wait a sec, see where it goes, adjust the power a little bit more, see where it goes. So you want to take it slow. Thankfully, your approach speed is quite slow. You usually have lots of time to work these things out when you're coming into land in the Pilatus PC-6. And as you can see, we're just getting ourselves, we're still not quite lined up here. I need to get myself centered up. We're happy at about 65 knots there. We're coming down at 500 feet a minute or so, just trying to shallow out the approach a little bit. Just jockeying the power a little bit back and forth. Trying to keep still a little high. We can probably come down a little bit below that. So the procedure I'm going to use on landing is basically as soon as the wheels touch, I am going to throw the propeller reverse switch, which is basically going to put the prop in feather mode, not really reverse mode. And then I can basically kill the power by pulling all the way back on that. And then I can re-engage it if I need a little bit more power to taxi. So here we are getting ourselves getting better lined up. Still around 65 knots. I'm liking the descent rate because we're going to float a little. It's a tail dragger, so we are going to want to touch down pretty slow or we'll bounce. So now we're getting about right. Keep the power on as we flare. Just going to keep the power on until I'm sure we've made the runway. And right about there. And we'll power off. And we're just gliding and down. And now we get the prop feathered while also trying to stay straight on the runway. Which, again, is a challenge. And you can see the prop is just windmilling now. And then we can add a little bit of brakes. We can get the prop going again a little bit. Just re-engage. We'll look for that taxiway there. So that's pretty much going to do it for our first look at the Pilatus PC-6 by Asobo with the Sim Update 7 and Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. I've enjoyed flying the aircraft. I still have a lot to learn about how to fly it well, but I think it's going to be fun to do that. I hope you enjoyed this video and hope you get a chance to try the aircraft yourself. By all means, if you've enjoyed the video, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. And come on by the Discord server if you want to talk anything flight sim oriented. For now, this is going to be Sidekick, signing off.